Well, hello and welcome to CBN News. Breaking coverage of the Supreme Court and their latest ruling on the presidential immunity case. Joined today by Brad Jacob, Regent University School of Law, and CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Brad, I want to start with you. I mean, this is the ruling that we've been waiting for the past couple of weeks for it to come down, and they waited till past the debate. Not sure if that was intentional or not, but let's talk about the ruling first. Just what did they decide? What was the split? What are the key things we need to know here?
Well, there's nothing surprising about this ruling. It divides the court 6-3, and there are a lot of people who believe that this court is ideologically 6-3 on every issue, and in fact, that's not true. What we've seen in this term in the court is a lot of different divisions of different justices in majorities and dissents. But here you have what everyone expects, I guess, as sort of the quote unquote conservative justices and the liberal justices. So you've got a 6-justice majority who don't really decide anything relative to Mr. Trump. They tell the obvious, which is there have to be some areas of the president's core constitutional functions for which he can't be held accountable in court. You can't have civil lawsuits challenging the president's official decisions. We've known that since the Nixon administration. And here they say you can't have criminal lawsuits affecting the president's core constitutional responsibilities. But the court, again, correctly suggests that doesn't mean that anything a person does during the time that that person holds the office of president is necessarily immune from criminal prosecution. You know, that my hypothetical, not the court, but if the president goes out and starts shooting people on Pennsylvania Avenue, he's not immune from criminal prosecution because that's not part of his official duties as president. So the court is basically sending this question of immunity back to the district court and saying, you're going to have to do trial work to tell us which of Donald Trump's activities concerning the 2020 election and his effort to overturn that election and working with, trying to get Vice President Pence to overturn the Electoral College, his speech to the crowd on January 6th before they attacked the Capitol. Before we can decide whether those things are criminal, you're going to have to tell us whether they involved official duties or just him as a private person who happened to hold the office of president. And I think that was an inevitable conclusion. So no big surprises.
What are these? One more question, Brad, before I get to David. What are the so going back to the lower court here? They're going to look at these things individually, these actions individually. What kind of sense do you have on what kind of hill they have to climb here on those arguments?
Well, again, it's going to depend on which parts of the argument. The Supreme Court told us that when the president was talking to the acting attorney general, that, of course, the president's interactions with his cabinet officers are core official duties. The court said the things with Vice President Pence is a little trickier, maybe a little closer to the margin. I think that at least some of what happened, particularly if you look at January 6th, the lower court is likely to say the president was not acting in his capacity as president if, in fact, they find that he worked up the crowd and incited them to go to the Capitol. And maybe that was criminal, maybe not. We don't know yet. But if it was, I think the lower court is probably going to say the president's official duties don't include deciding who will be the next president. And so when Mr. Trump was acting in that way, he was acting as a presidential candidate rather than as the president. That's my guess, but we'll have to wait until the trial court looks at it.
Yeah, and it looks like this doesn't look like it'll get done by November. Most likely, a lot would have to be, very, very unlikely.
Yep. No chance before November.
No chance at all. So
yeah,
not even. No, we don't even need to put a percentage on that one. Not happening. So, David, both sides now are already starting to spin this thing, and they're starting to kind of react. What have you seen so far, and what do you make of this?
Well, Trump is in all caps, as you might imagine, on Truth Social, saying victory, victory, democracy wins, X, Y, and Z, yada, 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 as Seinfeld would say. And it is. It's a victory for Trump, ... in the short term. Now we wait and find out from a legal perspective what it might mean in the months and years potentially to come. We don't know the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. But let's be honest here. Anytime there's chaos involved, and this decision feels a bit chaotic, and I'll explain in a moment, but anytime there's chaos involved, Donald Trump typically wins that, and he's winning today. He won today. I don't think there's any question about it. And why did he win? Well, specifically because these cases, the January 6th one and the Mar-a-Lago documents case, clearly not going to be tried before the November election. So that's a victory in and of itself. It also makes Jack Smith's job much harder at this point. Clearly, when you have to go back to the lower courts and kind of use that different now, or at least more explained burden of proof that the Supreme Court has given out instructions on, that's going to make Jack Smith have to jump through a few more hoops, if you will. So I think all in all, clearly this is a victory for Trump. But look, I think ultimately where this goes is we're in a very, very interesting, how do I say this? I want to call it a bit of a dilemma, but it's not so much a dilemma, but it's a key juncture in American history. I mean, if you look at the dissent by Sonia Sotomayor talking about how the majority opinion was just in essence reckless by she's the one arguing about SEAL Team 6 in the dissent. I mean, she's saying that, well, what happens if a president in an official act tells SEAL Team 6 to execute his political rival? It's an official act. He told SEAL Team 6 to do it. Does that now qualify under presidential immunity? She suggests, yes, it would. And she goes on to say a whole list of stuff. Now, we kind of scoff at that and laugh at that. And even Sonia Sotomayor said she hopes and prays it doesn't come to that, probably won't. But under this ruling, an official act like that would. So, we're in a very interesting time here, and there's a lot of unanswered questions going forward. Here's one, for example. I'd be curious to get the professor's take on this, but Donald Trump on January 6th goes and makes that infamous speech where, by the way, he said, let's march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, which was left out of the January 6th committee report, FYI. But he said that. Well, let's go back to the docket. I am pretty sure, and I'll double check this, but that was an official speech. Therefore, what? An official act on his calendar that day to make a speech at the Ellipse that afternoon. So if that's an official act, well, then therefore, does anything under that therefore be excluded? It's immune. There's a lot of unanswered questions here.
Yeah, and let's talk, Brad, about this. And this may apply here to kind of some of the things that David mentioned here, that the SEAL Team 6 and what actions, doing something egregious under your official actions. Does presumptive immunity, that was mentioned a few times here. Can you explain what that is and how, if at all, it sort of applies it does apply, but how does it apply in this case?
Yeah, the court draws a distinction between core constitutional functions and other executive actions. And the court says core constitutional functions, when the president is doing something that he's required to do by the Constitution, that is just across the board exempt from criminal liability. The court says there are other official things that a president does that are not his core responsibilities, that he's not required to do. And so there they said there is a presumption of immunity as long as it's official duties, again, drawing the line where the president is not acting as president, he's just acting as a person who at this moment happens to be in the office of president, but he's in his private capacity. But even among official duties, the court says if it's not a core constitutional function, the courts can examine that. And if they find that allowing criminal liability in a particular case would not interfere with the core functions of the presidency, then they may be able to override that presumption of immunity. I mean, the hardest case here is the one that David referred to, telling SEAL Team 6 to go assassinate somebody. Well, commanding military forces is very clearly a core constitutional responsibility of the president. So if he orders criminal conduct, boy, that's really where the rubber meets the road. And that hasn't happened here. I mean, this is nothing with President Trump, even in the worst conception, is nearly that blatant. So maybe the courts are just going to kind of dodge the most difficult hypotheticals and pray that it never comes up.
Well, this is essentially, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, Brad, but this is essentially the first time we've had a ruling kind of on this. So what type of precedent has been set here? How do you see this going forward when future cases may arise?
Yeah, again, we have, back to the Nixon administration, we have a ruling that presidents cannot be civilly liable for performing their constitutional duties. You can't sue a president for something that you think he or she has done wrong. I don't find this ruling particularly dramatic or world-changing. It's what I think most constitutional scholars would have expected. But it's true. We've never before in American history had a case where someone was accused of crime, was charged with crime. People can be accused of anything, but were indicted for crime during the period of time when that individual served as president of the United States. So it's brand new, but as it just seems to be the logical solution is to try to draw this line between different types of presidential conduct. The three dissenters, Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson, essentially say no immunity for anything, that everything the president does, even if it is constitutionally required duties, can be charged in criminal court. And that's a little bit scary because you have to remember, prosecutors include state prosecutors as well as federal prosecutors, and some state prosecutors are diametrically opposed politically to any given president. And even if the charges are outrageous and stupid, just to bring them would mean that a president or a former president has to go to court and defend those, and that's not an insignificant burden. So the dissent's position raises a lot of issues as well.
Yes.
Yeah, David, you had a response to that?
I was going to say, absolutely. I'm so glad the professor brought that up, because if you go with the dissent's response at that point, I mean, Barack Obama and drone strikes, potentially Fast and Furious. What about Joe Biden's potential acts that the Republican Congress? So that's also playing with fire on the flip side of this. Yeah, I am curious. Maybe the professor has a view on this one. I'm sure he's got quite a few views on different things. When I say views, constitutional views, which is, it seems to me that what we're talking about here is that this now all goes back to the lower courts. And I felt like the Supreme Court was saying, hey, next time, I'm putting this in a bit of a jocular vernacular, but, kind of take your time next time, courts. Don't go so quickly here, because, now it has to go back to the lower court. The lower courts will now kind of sift through each element of this, hence the chaos part. And then this all could come back before the U.S. Supreme Court again in some sort of different form or fashion, maybe more styled, more germane or more concentrated. But, we could be playing this U.S. Supreme Court constitutional, not game, but, this revolving constitutional crisis every single time that it keeps coming up, because this seems like there could be elements of this that have to be adjudicated.
I think that's right. I think implicitly what the Supreme Court is saying here was, you push this through to us too quickly.
Right.
The trial court didn't do its job. And one understands, this is so political, and David, you're the political expert. I'm not, but among a certain chunk of the country, it was enormously important to try to get this immunity issue resolved really fast, because you want to see if you can get Donald Trump convicted on more things before we get to the November election, because maybe that'll change the outcome. And I think, again, they don't say it, but I think implicit here, the Supreme Court is basically saying, even when there's something political involved, we need to follow the right process. And we can't answer this kind of a question at the appellate level without the trial court first doing more investigation and telling us more specifically what went on and whether it was official duties. And they have to make those judgments at the trial level. By the way, I think it's also worth noting that none of this has anything to do with the New York conviction for the hush money with the porn star and all of that, because that was not only was that a state court conviction, but it was based on conduct before Mr. Trump was president, and then the trial happened after he was no longer president. So nothing in that conviction is affected by what you can do to a president while he's in office as president. So if that one gets thrown out, it'll be on different grounds, not because of this immunity issue.
And Dan, what I was going to say is, Teflon Don, if you want to call him that, is now 3 for 3. Aspect of this, right? I mean, you've got the immunity case that essentially has gone, at least for the time being, in his favor. That's one. You of course have he was convicted in New York, and what happened is poll numbers went up. He became more popular. That's 2. And of course, Joe Biden's disastrous debate performance. That's 3. Everything is way. It's driving left bonkers from a political perspective, but that is pretty much stating the obvious at this point.
Yeah, it is. And David, we had a little trouble with your connection there, but I wanted to ask you one more question here. And, obviously after the debate, you had a lot of talk. Lots of people saying, hey, Democrats coming out, the New York Times op-ed board, like, noting the performance and whatnot. How does this play into what we're seeing develop here after the debate? Does this change anything at all? And what is the latest that we know on the Biden front while we have you here? Because going into the weekend, it was a lot of calls for we need to do something, but I don't know if that's stabilized. What are you seeing there?
Well, let me start by this. Can you hear me and see me okay before I go off?
I can right now.
Okay, because at my age, breath is everything, and oxygen is everything. So I don't want to waste it. Just kidding. Look, here's where it stands. It still stands with Joe Biden and Jill Biden and what they're going to do. My sense of this being around since, I don't know, Reconstruction, or at least it feels that way covering politics, it feels like this is one of those situations that just is not going away. I mean, this is not a crisis that blows over. We always hear about the crisis that blows over. That's not this. This is going to get worse for Biden. Why do I say that? Well, because he's getting older every single day. It's not going to go away. So therefore, where we're at right now is where we may not be in a week, because Joe and Jill Biden are clearly digging in. They don't want him to go anywhere, clearly. But what do the donors think? What do the poll numbers show? Well, we know what the poll numbers show. Even Democrats, only 55% of Democrats want him to continue on. That's a pathetic number. 55% of Democrats, not voters, Democrats want him to continue on. That's horrible. But there's been donor meetings. There'll be more donor meetings. And if the money dries up, then it becomes, what is the exit strategy for Biden? And at this point, it really should be about America and America's safety. But right now, the conversation is about how does Joe Biden save face? And I think the answer will eventually be, and this is where I think it's going, Dan, I think eventually Biden will see the writing on the wall and have to leave the race, because I think that drumbeat is not going to go away. I think it'll just get louder, especially with everything that he does in the next week or two, because he'll be scrutinized from a behavior standpoint. So it won't go away. And I think eventually the way it'll work is he'll have to say something along the lines of, look, I defeated Trump in 2020. I gave it my best shot. Age doesn't discriminate, and it's time for me to go. But I did what I set out to do, and then he'll start to paint a rosy picture of America from a PDF standpoint under his watch, X, Y, and Z, yada, yada, yada. And he'll say, thanks, it's been a pleasure. That's what I think is going to happen. And then ultimately, if he does decide to resign, once again, as a candidate, not as president, but as a candidate, then we watch to see, does he endorse Kamala Harris? My sense is he will, because that money, that campaign money, would go to Kamala Harris. And that would be obviously very important with just a few months before the election.
Yeah, I mean, interesting to see how this all plays out. A lot of options on the table, and historic ones we haven't seen in our lifetimes at all. Brad, any other observations on this big ruling today from the Supreme Court, which, as you said, went as expected in the presidential immunity case?
No, the bottom line here is the two federal cases involving Mr. Trump, the election interference case, and then that classified documents case down at Mar-a-Lago. They're not going anywhere before November, and neither does the Georgia election interference case seem to be going anywhere. So, in terms of will new court decisions affect former President Trump's electability? I think the answer is no. What we're going to have is what we've got now, which is the New York case. Everything else, how it comes down, is going to be too late to affect the election. And of course, if the federal cases are still pending and Mr. Trump wins the election and takes office in January, he can then presumably order the Justice Department to drop those cases, because the Justice Department is under the authority of the president. We have a unitary executive. He holds all executive authority. So if he wins, the federal cases will probably go away and be heard of no more. The Georgia case might still go ahead, but not in enough time to have any effect on November.
And just real quick, Dan, just getting word, I put on my reading glasses because otherwise I can't see a thing. And I just got a text from one of Trump's lawyers working on one of his cases, the D.C. case, the January 6th case, who says that the D.C. case is, quote, on life support and hospice care, is what he just texted me. So they're clearly happy with today's ruling.
All right. Well, Brad Jacob from Regent University School of Law and CBN's chief political analyst, David Brody. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here and breaking down this big ruling today. Pretty much, I think that was the last one out of. There's nothing else, right? Have they cleared the slate?
The docket is done. The social media case involving Texas and Florida also came down today, and those were the last two. So they're all right this term.
I'm sorry.
Right,
do you want to just a quick? Can I just do
quickly,
a quick,
very, very quickly, because
quickly? There was a majority concurrent opinion by Clarence Thomas talking about how Jack Smith's the appointment of Jack Smith. Council. So there's that. Some way down the road.
All right. Well, gentlemen, wow, appreciate it. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate y'all being here. And we thank you for tuning in and checking out CBN News. That's going to do it for our breaking coverage. Stay tuned to cbnnews.com for more developments on the news of the day from a Christian perspective. God bless. We'll see you next time.